At my sister's wedding, I caught my wife and my brother-in-law in the middle of an affair. I turned to the bride and she just winked at me. Don't worry, the main event is about to begin. Look, I'm not saying I expected my sister's wedding to be perfect, because let's be real, nothing involving my family in an open bar ever goes according to plan. But I at least thought I'd make it through the ceremony without my entire world imploding like a cheap souffle. The Grand Sterling Hotel was draped in enough white roses and fairy lights to make a Pinterest board weep with joy. And I was standing there in my custom fitted navy suit, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I had my life together. My wife Madison was beside me, looking absolutely devastating in this emerald silk number that probably cost more than my first car. And honestly, I was feeling pretty damn smug about the whole situation. Big brother duties were in full effect. I'd given the rehearsal dinner speech without crying or making any inappropriate jokes. I'd wrangled the distant cousins who showed up 3 hours early and already half drunk, and I'd even managed to tie my own bow tie without YouTube assistance. Gold star for me, right? My sister Harper was marrying Liam Sterling, and before you ask, yes, his last name matched the hotel, because of course it did. The guy was basically what happened when a dental degree, a trust fund, and a gym membership had a baby. Everyone loved him. My parents treated him like the son they'd actually wanted instead of the one they got who still couldn't figure out how to properly fold a fitted sheet. The aunts giggled around him like teenagers at a boy band concert. Even my buddies from college, who normally had the collective emotional intelligence of a potato, kept telling me how lucky Harper was to land such a stand-up guy. And those abs? Jesus Christ. The man's stomach looked like it had been chiseled by Michelangelo during a particularly inspired afternoon. I'm pretty sure someone had already started a prayer circle dedicated to his core muscles. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, which meant by 3:30 the hotel was packed with about 200 of our closest friends, relatives, and random people my mother had apparently met at the grocery store and invited because they seemed lovely. The floral arch near the garden terrace was getting absolutely demolished by guests taking selfies because apparently nobody can just experience a moment anymore without documenting it for the 7 people who actually look at their Instagram stories. I was doing my brotherly rounds, shaking hands, accepting compliments on my suit, and generally pretending I enjoyed small talk with people whose names I'd definitely forgotten 30 seconds after being introduced. That's when Madison leaned over, touched my arm with those perfectly manicured nails, and whispered that she needed a moment. Now, in retrospect, that should have been my first red flag because Madison had never needed a moment in her entire life. The woman once sat through a 4-hour flight with food poisoning and didn't complain once because she didn't want to seem dramatic. But I just nodded, kissed her cheek like the oblivious husband I was, and told her I'd catch up with her before the ceremony started. She smiled, that practice smile she used for client meetings and my mother, and disappeared into the crowd wearing heels that could double as weapons. I kept making my rounds, listening to Uncle Frank's story about his new boat for the third time that day, when I realized we were getting close to showtime and Madison still hadn't reappeared. I checked my phone. Nothing. I scanned the terrace, the main hall, even poked my head into the bride's suite where Harper was getting final touch-ups and looked so calm I briefly wondered if she'd been meditating or had discovered some very effective anxiety medication. She just smiled at me in the mirror and said, "Madison's fine, go find your seat." But something in her voice felt off, like she knew something I didn't, which honestly should have been my second red flag of the day. Instead of heading to my seat like a sensible person, I decided to play detective. The hotel was massive, all winding hallways and private rooms that probably hosted their fair share of sketchy business deals and extramarital hookups. I wandered past the main ballroom, down a corridor lined with abstract art that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto canvas and called it inspiration, heading toward the West Wing where I'd heard there was a wine cellar the hotel used for private tastings. Madison loved wine. She'd probably gone to check it out, maybe snap a picture for her food blog that she updated once every 6 months, and had exactly 47 followers, 30 of which were definitely bots. I heard voices as I got closer. Low, urgent, the kind of whispers that make your stomach clench even before your brain catches up with what's happening. There was a partially open door at the end of the hallway, warm light spilling out, and like an idiot, I walked right up to it and pushed it open wider because apparently I enjoy emotional devastation. And there they were. My wife Madison, pressed against the wall with her lipstick smudged across her face like a crime scene, and Liam, my sister's fiance. The golden boy. The man with the religious abs. Standing there with his tie hanging loose around his neck like a white flag of surrender, his shirt half untucked, looking guilty as hell. I stood there frozen, my brain trying to process the scene like a computer that had just been asked to divide by zero. Madison's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock that would have been comedic if it wasn't currently destroying my life. She gasped, actually gasped like a character in a soap opera, and tried to push away from the wall, but her heel caught on the carpet. Liam, to his credit, at least had the decency to look horrified. He started stammering something about, "This isn't what it looks like," which is universally the dumbest thing anyone has ever said in the history of getting caught, because it was exactly what it looked like. His hands were fumbling with his belt, trying to restore some dignity to a situation that had absolutely none available. I opened my mouth, not even sure what was about to come out, probably something between a scream and a very creative string of profanity, when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, deliberate. I turned, still in shock, and there was Harper, my little sister, the bride, standing in her full wedding dress, veil and all, looking at the scene with an expression that was weirdly, unsettlingly calm. She should have been crying, screaming, maybe throwing punches, but instead she just looked at me, then at them, then back at me. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something light and floral that seemed wildly inappropriate for the moment, and leaned in toward my ear. "Don't worry, brother," she whispered, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "The main event's about to begin." Then she winked. Actually winked. Like we were in on some joke together that I definitely hadn't been told about. She straightened up, smoothed down her dress, and walked back down the hallway without another word, her train dragging behind her like she was heading to her execution instead of her wedding. I stood there, still frozen, looking between Madison's pale face and Liam's panicked expression, and one thought kept cycling through my brain on repeat. What the hell was my sister planning? I stumbled out of that hallway like a drunk person trying to remember how legs worked, except I was stone cold sober and just profoundly cosmically screwed. My hands were shaking, my heart was doing that thing where it feels like it's trying to escape through your rib cage, and I'm pretty sure I looked like someone who'd just witnessed a murder, which, emotionally speaking, I basically had. The betrayal tasted like burnt whiskey mixed with battery acid, that kind of bitter that coats your entire throat and makes you want to set something on fire, preferably your entire life. I made it to the hotel bar, which thankfully was still open for pre-ceremony drinks, and I must have looked as destroyed as I felt, because the bartender took one look at me and started pouring without asking what I wanted. Before I could even pick up the glass, Harper appeared beside me like some kind of wedding dress wearing ghost. She was supposed to be getting final photos taken or having some kind of bride moment with Mom, but instead she slid onto the bar stool next to me, grabbed the drink the bartender had just poured, and downed it in one smooth motion that would have impressed a college fraternity. Then she turned to the bartender and said, "Two more, doubles, and keep them coming." The bartender, bless him, didn't ask questions. He just nodded and got to work while I sat there staring at my sister like she'd grown a second head. "Harper, Harper, what the actual hell is happening right now?" I managed to croak out, my voice sounding like I'd swallowed gravel. "Did you not just see what I saw back there? Your fiancé was literally—" She held up one perfectly manicured hand, cutting me off mid-sentence, and pushed a fresh glass toward me. "Drink first, freak out second," she said calmly, like she was giving me instructions on how to assemble IKEA furniture instead of dealing with a matrimonial apocalypse. I grabbed the glass and threw it back, the whiskey burning down my throat in a way that felt almost comforting compared to the burning sensation of my entire world collapsing. "You didn't ruin the wedding," Harper said, studying her nails like we were discussing the weather. "You just made it more entertaining." I choked on absolutely nothing, sputtering like a broken engine. "Entertaining? Harper, I just caught your future husband tongue deep in my wife's mouth, and you're talking about entertainment? Are you having a stroke? Should I call someone?" She laughed, actually laughed. This light tinkling sound that belonged at a garden party, not at the scene of a double betrayal. "Oh, sweetie," she said, patting my arm like I was a confused child. "You think I didn't know?" The bar tilted slightly, or maybe that was just my brain trying to reboot. "You knew? You knew that Madison and Liam were—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. Harper nodded, taking a delicate sip of her drink like we were having afternoon tea. For months, actually, since March, to be specific. I caught them at that charity gala you two bailed on because Madison had that migraine. She made air quotes around migraine, and suddenly that night came flooding back. Madison insisting she couldn't possibly attend. Me staying home to take care of her, her mysteriously feeling better 2 hours later and going out for a quick drive to clear her head. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, and I hated how my voice cracked on the last word. Harper's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since this nightmare began. Because I needed proof and I needed time. This isn't just about cheating, big brother. This is so much bigger than two idiots who couldn't keep it in their pants. She pulled out her phone, swiped through a few screens, and showed me what looked like financial documents, emails, text message screenshots. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers and corporate jargon, my brain still foggy from shock and whiskey. Turns out my darling fiancé isn't just a cheating scumbag, Harper explained, her voice taking on this cold, analytical tone I'd never heard from her before. He's also a scheming, corporate espionage committing scumbag. Remember when Dad died last year and left me that business inheritance? The tech startup he'd been funding? I nodded slowly. Our father had invested heavily in Harper's company before he passed, leaving her majority shares and enough capital to actually make something of it. Liam has been trying to get access to it since day one. The marriage wasn't about love. It was about legal access to my assets. And your wife? She paused, taking another sip. She's been feeding him information. Financial records, business plans, investor contacts, everything. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach by someone wearing brass knuckles. Madison? My Madison? Even as I said it, I realized how stupid it sounded. She clearly wasn't my Madison anymore, if she ever had been. Harper pulled up more screenshots, messages between Madison and Liam discussing strategy, talking about how to handle me, how to keep me distracted and compliant. There was one message from Madison that read, "He's so trusting it's almost sad. This will be easier than we thought." I wanted to throw up. I wanted to throw my phone. I wanted to throw myself off the hotel roof. They've been planning this for almost a year, Harper continued, her voice steady, despite the absolute insanity of what she was telling me. Liam approached Madison at some corporate mixer, figured out she was married to you, saw an opportunity. They started the affair, started the planning. The goal was simple: marry me, get access to the company, drain the assets through a series of investments and business opportunities, then divorce me and disappear with the money. Madison was supposed to keep you occupied, keep you from noticing anything suspicious, maybe even get you to sign some documents as a concerned brother trying to help his sister's new husband. I was going to be sick, actually physically sick. So this whole time, while I was planning anniversary dinners and trying to be a good husband, she was just playing me? Harper nodded sympathetically. Like a fiddle at a hoedown. I laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. Why didn't you call off the wedding? Why go through with it if you knew? That's when Harper's expression changed, transforming into something calculating and almost scary. My little sister, who used to cry over sad commercials and rescue injured birds, suddenly looked like a chess grandmaster planning a checkmate. Because I needed them to think they'd won, she said simply. I needed Liam confident, Madison comfortable, both of them convinced they were getting away with it. I've spent the last 4 months quietly collecting evidence, every email, every text, every bank transfer, every shady meeting. I've got phone records, security footage, witness statements from people they thought were on their side but were actually reporting to me. I've built an airtight case with the help of a very expensive legal team and a private investigator who used to work for the FBI. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made corporate rivals wet themselves. And what better stage to expose them than my own wedding, in front of 200 people, with cameras rolling for the memories? I stared at my sister like I was seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the Harper who used to steal my Halloween candy and cry when she didn't get invited to parties. This was someone else entirely, someone brilliant and ruthless and kind of terrifying. You've been playing them this whole time? She nodded. Like a symphony. Every worried conversation about wedding planning, setup, every time I asked Liam's opinion on business decisions, test. Every interaction with Madison where I played the clueless bride. Performance art. So when you said the main event's about to begin, I trailed off, finally understanding. Harper's smile widened. Oh, big brother, you have no idea what's coming. I didn't spend 6 months planning the wedding of the year just to say I do to a con artist. I planned the exposure of the decade. She stood up, smoothed down her dress, and checked her reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Perfect bride, perfect makeup, perfect smile. So don't punch him yet, she said, turning back to me. Let's make him famous first. The bad kind of famous. The kind where your face ends up on true crime podcasts and Reddit threads. I sat there, drink in hand, watching my baby sister walk back toward her wedding ceremony with the confidence of a woman who'd just armed a nuclear bomb and was waiting for the fireworks. And for the first time since opening that door, I smiled. A real smile. Because maybe, just maybe, this wedding wasn't going to be the disaster I thought it was. It was going to be so much better. I made my way back to my designated seat in the third row, right behind Mom and her book club friends, who'd somehow scored premium real estate for this theatrical production masquerading as a wedding. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and I'm pretty sure I was operating on pure adrenaline and spite at this point. The whiskey was doing its job, taking the edge off the soul-crushing betrayal while keeping me just coherent enough to appreciate whatever nuclear option Harper had planned. I slid into my seat trying to look like a normal, functional human being who hadn't just discovered his wife was a corporate spy and his brother-in-law was a con artist with really good teeth. Madison was already seated 2 rows ahead of me, having apparently composed herself enough to rejoin society. She'd fixed her lipstick, smoothed her hair, and was now dabbing at her eyes with a tissue like she was genuinely moved by the occasion. The audacity was actually impressive in a psychotic kind of way. She was probably wiping away guilt, not tears or maybe just sweat from the panic of almost getting caught. Although technically we did catch her, so really she was sweating from actually getting caught but not yet facing consequences, which I guess is its own special kind of anxiety. I wondered if they taught how to pretend everything's fine while your life implodes classes somewhere, because she deserved a PhD. The string quartet started playing something classical and pretentious that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and everyone stood up in that synchronized way people do at weddings, like we'd all been programmed by the same wedding industrial complex. The doors at the back of the garden opened, and the bridesmaids started their slow march down the aisle in their dusty rose dresses, smiling and clutching bouquets of peonies and roses that probably required a small loan to purchase. Harper had gone all out on this wedding. The flowers alone could have fed a small country, and the ice sculpture near the bar was shaped like a swan that was slowly melting in the late afternoon sun, which felt weirdly metaphorical for the whole situation. Liam appeared at the altar looking like every Pinterest board's dream groom. Perfectly tailored gray suit, pocket square, folded just so. Hair styled in that deliberately messy way that actually requires 45 minutes and 6 products to achieve. He was smiling at the guests with that practiced charm that had fooled literally everyone, including me, for the past 2 years. Standing next to the priest, he looked like a man who had everything figured out, like life was just this easy series of checkboxes he'd been ticking off. Good education? Check. Successful career? Check. Beautiful bride? Check. Massive fraud scheme that would definitely land him in federal prison? Well, that wasn't on the checklist, but surprise. I leaned over to Jake, Liam's best man, who was standing at the altar looking slightly nervous in that way groomsmen always do when they realize hundreds of people are staring at them. $5 says something wild happens during the vows, I whispered. Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Which, fair assessment, honestly. Dude, what are you talking about? This is Harper's day. Nothing's going to... I held up my hand. Just wait. Trust me on this one. Keep your phone ready. He frowned but pulled his phone out slightly, probably thinking I'd finally cracked under the pressure of being related to my family. The music swelled into that traditional wedding march that makes everyone's eyes automatically water, even if they're dead inside, and Harper appeared at the entrance. She looked absolutely stunning, because of course she did. My sister wouldn't be caught dead looking anything less than perfect, especially not at her own tactical strike disguised as a wedding ceremony. Her dress was this elegant lace and silk number that probably cost more than a decent used car, with a train that went on for miles. Mom was crying beside her. actual tears streaming down her face, completely oblivious to the fact that her daughter was about to detonate a social nuclear bomb in approximately 20 minutes. Harper walked down that aisle like she was floating, her face serene and glowing with what everyone probably thought was bridal joy, but what I now recognized as the calm confidence of someone who's about to destroy their enemies in high definition. When she passed my row, she caught my eye and gave me the tiniest smile, just a little quirk of her lips that said, "Buckle up, big brother. The roller coaster's about to drop." I tried to smile back, but I'm pretty sure it came out looking more like a grimace. My face muscles had apparently forgotten how to do normal human expressions. Liam's face when he saw Harper was actually Oscar-worthy. He looked genuinely moved, maybe even teary-eyed, like he was the luckiest man in the world. Method acting at its finest, folks. Either that or he was so deep in his own con that he'd actually convinced himself he loved her, which would be almost sad if he wasn't a lying, cheating corporate criminal who was currently planning to rob my sister blind. Harper reached the altar, handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, and took Liam's hands. From where I was sitting, they looked like a fairy tale couple, the kind that gets featured in those expensive wedding magazines with names like Bliss or Forever or We're definitely getting divorced in 5 years, but let's pretend otherwise. The priest cleared his throat and began with the standard wedding ceremony speech about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, completely unaware that he was presiding over what was about to become the most infamous wedding ceremony since that Red Wedding episode on Game of Thrones, except with less stabbing and more public humiliation. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Harper Marie Collins and Liam Andrew Sterling. He droned on in that special monotone voice priests reserve for ceremonies they've performed 8,000 times. I caught Madison's eye from her seat, and she immediately looked away, her jaw tightening. Good, be nervous, be very nervous. You should be having a full-blown panic attack right now. Aw, honestly. I wondered if she knew that Harper knew, if Liam had texted her some frantic warning after our hallway encounter. Probably not, judging by how she was still sitting there instead of sprinting for the exit in the nearest international airport. Some part of me, the part that had loved her or thought I'd loved her, felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but maybe pity. Like watching someone walk toward a cliff edge in the dark, completely unaware of the drop. The priest continued his speech about the sanctity of marriage, commitment, honoring one another, all the standard promises that clearly meant absolutely nothing to the two people standing at the altar. Marriage is a sacred covenant, he said solemnly, built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Trust, honesty, mutual respect. Sure, let's go with that. Maybe after the ceremony we could all discuss the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus too, since we were apparently living in a fantasy world. Harper was still holding Liam's hands still smiling serenely, and I had to admire her commitment to the bit. She should genuinely consider acting as a career after this, because her performance was flawless. When she'd passed by me earlier, she'd whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "You sure you're okay?" And she'd looked at me with actual concern in her eyes. Like despite orchestrating this entire elaborate revenge plot, she was still worried about her big brother's emotional state. I'd whispered back, "Are you?" Because honestly, I still wasn't entirely sure if my sister was having a calculated moment of genius or a very elaborate mental breakdown. Her response had been simple. "Oh, I'm some spectacular." And the way she'd said it, with that particular emphasis on spectacular, had sent a chill down my spine. That was my first real clue that I should have brought popcorn to this event. Maybe some of those fancy flavored ones they sell at the movies, because whatever Harper had planned was going to be entertaining as hell. Possibly literally hell. Depending on your perspective and how you felt about public humiliation and the complete destruction of someone's reputation and freedom. The violinists near the floral arch kept playing something soft and romantic. Probably Pachelbel's canon, because every wedding is legally required to include it, apparently. And somewhere near the back, I heard someone's baby start to fuss before being quickly hushed. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting everything in that golden hour light that photographers lose their minds over, making the whole scene look like something out of a romance movie. The Grand Sterling Hotel garden had never looked more beautiful, draped in flowers and fairy lights and completely oblivious to the incoming storm. I settled back in my seat my heart still racing, but my mind starting to clear. Whatever happened next, whatever Harper had planned, I was ready. Well, probably not actually ready because how do you prepare for something like this? But I was present. I was conscious. I was no longer the oblivious idiot who'd walked into that hallway thinking his biggest problem was remembering his speech for the reception. I glanced at Madison one more time, watching her dab at her eyes again, and thought, enjoy these last few minutes of peace, because your world's about to end, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it. The priest smiled at the crowd and said, and now the couple has prepared their own vows. Liam pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket pocket, unfolded it carefully, and began to speak. This was going to be good. Liam cleared his throat with this dramatic pause that probably looked romantic to everyone who wasn't currently fantasizing about launching him into the sun, and began reading from his little paper with the kind of earnest expression that would make a Hallmark movie director weep with joy. Harper, he started, his voice doing that annoying thing where it gets all soft and emotional. From the moment I met you, I knew you were special. Oh, I bet you did, buddy. Special as in, has a massive inheritance I can steal. Uh, right? You challenged me to be a better man, he continued, and I had to physically restrain myself from shouting, how's that working out for you? At the top of my lungs. The guests were eating it up like free samples at Costco. Aunt Linda was already crying into her napkin, and Uncle Frank was nodding approvingly, like Liam had just delivered the Gettysburg Address instead of what was essentially a grocery list of lies wrapped in fancy words. You've shown me what true partnership means, Liam said, his voice cracking slightly for effect. And honestly, the man deserved an Emmy for this performance. You've trusted me with your heart, your dreams, your future, yeah, and your bank account information, business plans, and complete financial portfolio. But sure, let's focus on the poetic stuff. He went on, something about soulmates and forever, and building a life together, each word dripping with the emotional depth of a PowerPoint presentation about quarterly earnings. I watched Harper's face carefully, looking for any crack in her serene, bright expression, but she was holding steady like a statue, a really pretty, really calculating statue that was about to come to life and wreck everyone's day. Madison was still dabbing at her eyes periodically, probably trying to look moved, but mostly just looking guilty, at least to me. To everyone else, she probably looked like a supportive sister-in-law getting emotional at the beautiful ceremony. Liam was building to his grand finale now, really laying it on thick. And so today, in front of all our family and friends, I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you. That's when the back doors of the garden burst open with a bang that could probably be heard in the next county, and a woman in a bright red dress came storming down the aisle like she was on a mission from God himself. The collective gasp from the crowd was so loud it probably registered on the Richter scale. Violins screeched to a halt mid-note. The baby that had been fussing earlier started full-on wailing, and approximately 50 phones immediately came out to record what was clearly about to become the most viral wedding moment since that couple's first dance caught fire. That man is a liar, the woman shouted, pointing at Liam with a finger that could have doubled as a weapon. She was tall, blonde, absolutely furious, and wearing heels that made very aggressive clicking sounds as she marched toward the altar. The crowd was living for this. I could see people literally sitting forward in their seats, some standing up to get a better view. This was better than any reality TV show, and it was happening live with no commercial breaks. Liam's face went from romantic groom to shocked defendant faster than you could say plot twist, his skin draining of color until he looked like he'd seen a ghost, or possibly multiple ghosts, an entire haunted house of ghosts. Harper, and this is what really sold me on her absolute ice-cold composure, didn't even flinch. She just stood there calmly, still holding her bouquet, watching this red-dressed woman storm toward her wedding like this was a totally normal thing that happened at every ceremony. The priest looked like he was about to have a heart attack, his mouth opening and closing like a fish that had been unexpectedly yanked out of water. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to, he started, but Red Dress wasn't having it. Oh, you're going to want to hear this, she said, her voice carrying across the garden with the kind of projection that suggested she'd either done theater or was just really, really angry. Because that man, she pointed at Liam again, is supposed to be marrying me. The crowd gasped again, somehow even louder than the first time. Aunt Linda looked like she might actually faint. Uncle Frank had his phone out recording everything, the opportunistic bastard. Madison's face had gone completely white, probably realizing that the situation was spiraling into chaos and taking her little conspiracy plan down with it. The woman reached into her designer purse, because even in crisis, we maintain our aesthetic apparently, and pulled out a stack of photos, waving them around like evidence at a trial. We were engaged for 3 years, she announced to the crowd, who were now fully invested in this drama, like it was the season finale of their favorite show. 3 years. We had a venue booked, a photographer. I'd already bought my dress. Her voice cracked on that last part. And honestly, despite everything, I felt a little bad for her. Getting screwed over by Liam seemed to be his primary hobby. Elena, please, Liam started, finally finding his voice, which immediately confirmed that he knew exactly who this woman was, and that her crashing the wedding wasn't exactly a surprise to him. Elena? Harper said quietly, finally breaking her silence. Is that the ex-fiancé you told me died in a car accident last year? Oh shit. Oh shit. The crowd collectively lost their minds. Elena's eyes went wide. He told you I was dead? She turned back to Liam with a fury that could probably power a small city. You told her I was dead, you absolute psychopath? I leaned back in my seat, muttering to Jake, who was still standing at the altar looking like he'd accidentally wandered into a war zone. 5 stars. Would attend again. This is better than anything on Netflix. Jake just stared at me, then at the unfolding chaos, then back at me. Dude, what is happening right now? He hissed. Entertainment, I replied, echoing Harper's words from earlier. Premium, organic, grass-fed entertainment. Liam was stammering now, his smooth con artist facade cracking like cheap plaster. That's not... I can explain, Elena, you're confused. But Elena wasn't interested in his explanations. She started showing the photos to guests in the front row, and from what I could see, they were pictures of her and Liam together. Beach vacations, fancy dinners, casual couple selfies, the kind of documentation that clearly showed they'd been way more than casual acquaintances. We were together for 5 years total, Elena continued, her voice getting stronger. We had a whole life planned. And then one day, he just vanished. Changed his number, moved apartments, blocked me on everything. I thought something terrible had happened to him until I saw the engagement announcement in the newspaper 3 months ago. Madison chose this moment to pretend to faint, probably figuring that playing the damsel in distress would get her out of the spotlight. She did this whole dramatic swoon thing that would have been more convincing if she hadn't clearly calculated exactly which direction to fall to avoid actually hitting the ground too hard. 2 concerned guests rushed to help her, fanning her with their programs and offering water. Nice try, Madison. Real subtle. I saw right through that performance and gave it a solid 2 out of 10 for execution. Harper remained absolutely calm through all of this, which was somehow the most unsettling part of the entire situation. While Elena was shouting, Liam was stammering, guests were gasping, and Madison was performing her award-worthy fake faint, my sister just stood there, at the altar, looking serene as a Buddha statue. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest smile, just a tiny upturn of her lips, that said, "We're just getting started." That's when I knew for absolute certain that Elena's dramatic entrance wasn't an accident. Harper had orchestrated this. Somehow, someway, my genius sister had found Liam's ex-fiancée and arranged for her to crash the wedding at the exact right moment for maximum impact. The priest was trying to restore order, holding up his hands and saying something about taking a brief pause to sort things out, but nobody was listening to him. The crowd was buzzing with conversation. Phones were recording from every angle, and somewhere in the chaos, I heard Cousin Ashley saying to her husband, "I told you we should have gotten the premium bar package. This is going to be a long night." Elena was still near the altar, breathing hard, mascara starting to run down her face in a way that was both tragic and kind of iconic. Liam looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole, which honestly was the most relatable he'd been all day. Harper finally moved, stepping forward and gently touching Elena's arm. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, and Elena looked at her with confusion mixed with the kind of respect you give someone when you realize they're on your team. I think everyone here needed to know who they were celebrating today. She turned to face the crowd, her wedding dress catching the evening light perfectly, and raised her voice just enough to carry across the garden. "And don't worry, everyone. Don't leave yet. We're just getting started." She gestured toward the side of the garden where the reception tent was set up. "The bar's still open, and I promise you..." She paused for dramatic effect, and damn if my sister didn't have perfect timing. There's much more to the show. I watched Madison's eyes flutter open from her fake faint, saw the panic register on her face as she realized that Harper wasn't devastated or shocked or falling apart. Harper was in complete control, and that meant Madison's entire world was about to collapse. I settled deeper into my seat, wishing desperately that I actually had that popcorn I joked about earlier because Act 2 of this theatrical production was clearly about to begin, and something told me it was going to make Elena's entrance look like a warm-up act. Harper walked toward the microphone that had been set up near the altar for the ceremony, her wedding dress trailing behind her like she was a queen approaching her throne instead of a bride at her own imploding wedding. The crowd had gone from shocked gasps to confused murmuring, everyone trying to figure out what the hell was happening and whether they should stay seated or make a run for the exits. I saw Mom standing up near the front, looking completely bewildered, probably wondering if her daughter had finally snapped under the pressure of wedding planning. Dad would have loved this chaos, honestly. He always said Harper had his sense of dramatic timing. Before we continue, Harper said into the microphone, her voice clear and steady, I'd like to invite someone very special to join me up here. She turned and looked directly at me, her eyes sparkling with something that was either genius or insanity. Possibly both. My wonderful brother has been dying to say something all day, haven't you? Every single head in that garden swiveled toward me like I was suddenly the main character in a horror movie. I felt my stomach drop somewhere into my shoes. Madison's fake faint recovery froze mid-performance, her eyes going wide with what I can only describe as pure terror. Liam looked like he was about to throw up, which would have been satisfying if I wasn't currently having my own minor panic attack. Come on up, big brother, Harper said cheerfully, like she was inviting me to share a funny story at Thanksgiving dinner instead of participate in what was clearly about to become a public execution. You've been holding it in all day. Time to let it out. I stood up on legs that felt like they were made of overcooked spaghetti, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The walk from my seat to the altar felt like it took approximately 7 years. Guests were whispering frantically, probably trying to figure out if this was some weird wedding tradition they'd never heard of or if they were witnessing a complete mental breakdown in real time. I reached the altar and Harper handed me the microphone with a smile that would have looked sweet if I didn't know she was currently orchestrating the destruction of two people's entire lives. Go ahead, she said quietly, just for me. Tell them what you saw. I looked at Madison, who was now fully sitting up, no longer pretending to be faint, her face a mask of panic, barely held together by expensive foundation. Then I looked at Liam, who had gone from golden boy groom to cornered animal in the space of about 15 minutes. Then I looked at the crowd of 200 people, all staring at me expectantly, phones out, ready to capture whatever came next. Okay, I said into the microphone, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. So, funny story, about 30 minutes ago, I went looking for my wife. I paused, letting that hang in the air. Madison, you remember, right? When you said you needed a moment? Madison's face went from pale to ghost white, and I swear I saw her calculating whether she could make it to the parking lot before anyone could stop her. Well, I found her, in a hallway near the wine cellar, and she wasn't alone. The crowd leaned forward collectively, like a single organism hungry for drama. I could see Aunt Linda clutching her pearls, literally clutching them, both hands wrapped around that string of pearls like they were going to save her from this scandal. She was with someone. Someone we all know pretty well, actually. Someone who's supposed to be, I don't know, getting married right now? I turned and looked directly at Liam. You want to tell them or should I? Before Liam could stammer out whatever excuse his brain was frantically trying to construct, Harper touched my arm and said, Actually, why don't we just show them? She gestured toward the massive LED screens that had been set up around the garden, the ones that were supposed to display a romantic slideshow of Harper and Liam's relationship during the reception. You know, the kind of schmaltzy montage every wedding has, full of sunset photos and candid laughs and heavily filtered Instagram moments that make everyone go aw and reach for more champagne. The screens flickered to life, and what appeared wasn't a romantic slideshow, not even close. It was security camera footage, crystal clear, high definition, absolutely unmistakable. There was Madison, pressed against that hallway wall, and there was Liam, tie loose, shirt untucked, both of them locked in an embrace that left absolutely zero room for innocent interpretation. The timestamp in the corner read today's date, less than an hour ago. The crowd erupted. Not gasps this time, actual eruptions. Screams, shouts, at least three people saying, "Oh my God," loud enough to echo off the hotel walls. But Harper wasn't done. The footage changed, showing different angles, different dates. Madison and Liam at a restaurant, holding hands across the table. Madison and Liam entering a hotel room together. Not this hotel, some other one. The timestamp showing a date from 3 months ago. Madison and Liam in what looked like a parking garage, exchanging papers and documents. Clearly trying to be sneaky and failing spectacularly thanks to whoever had installed those security cameras. The screens kept cycling through image after image, each one more damning than the last. A greatest hits compilation of betrayal and conspiracy. Madison screamed. Actually screamed like someone had set her on fire. "It's edited! This is fake! Someone edited these!" She was standing now, pointing at the screens with a shaking hand, her voice hitting registers that could probably shatter glass. "This is some kind of setup! Harper, you crazy bitch! You did this!" Several guests gasped at the language, because apparently adultery and corporate espionage were fine, but profanity at a wedding was crossing a line. Mom looked like she was trying to decide whether to cry or start throwing things. Liam had gone completely silent, standing frozen at the altar, like a statue of a man who'd just realized his entire life was over. He wasn't even trying to defend himself anymore, just staring at the screens with the expression of someone watching their house burn down while they stood in the driveway. "I can explain," he finally managed to whisper, but the microphone picked it up and broadcast it across the garden. And honestly, those 3 words might be the most pathetic thing I'd ever heard. "Unless your explanation involves cloning technology," I said into the microphone, surprised by how calm I sounded. "I'd strongly suggest you shut up." A few people in the crowd actually laughed, nervous laughter that rippled through the garden like a wave. I looked at Harper, who was still standing there, serene as ever, and I realized that we weren't even close to done. The screens changed again, this time showing email exchanges, financial documents, text messages discussing strategy, discussing me, discussing Harper's company, and how to gain access to it. The messages were blown up large enough for everyone to read, and they painted a picture so clear that even the most generous interpretation couldn't spin it into anything but exactly what it was, a calculated, deliberate con. "For those of you who can't see the screens clearly," Harper said, taking the microphone from me, with a smile that could freeze lava, "let me summarize. My fiance and my sister-in-law have been having an affair for approximately 8 months. But it's not just an affair. That would be too simple, too pedestrian. They've also been conspiring to commit corporate espionage and fraud." She said it so casually, like she was describing the weather or reading a grocery list. "The goal was for Liam to marry me, gain legal access to my company and assets, systematically drain them through a series of fake investments and business opportunities, and then divorce me and disappear with the money. Madison's role was to keep my brother distracted, compliant, and if necessary, get him to sign documents as a concerned family member, trying to help his sister's new husband succeed." The crowd had gone completely silent now, everyone processing this information like their brains had suddenly been asked to solve calculus problems in a language they didn't speak. Harper continued, her voice never wavering. "I discovered this plan in March, thanks to some sloppy operational security on their part. Never conduct criminal conspiracy over hotel Wi-Fi, by the way, and that's just amateur hour. Since then, I've been working with a legal team and a private investigator to document everything. Every meeting, every message, every transaction. I've got bank records showing money transfers, phone records showing thousands of calls between them, witness statements from people they thought were accomplices but who were actually working for me." She paused, letting it sink in, and then delivered the final blow. "I went ahead with the wedding because I needed them confident. I needed them to think they'd won, that their plan was working perfectly. Because the best time to catch a con artist isn't when they're planning the con, it's when they think they've already succeeded." Harper raised her glass of champagne that someone had helpfully placed on a nearby table. "And that, everyone, concludes the vows portion of today's ceremony. The reception will proceed as planned, because I already paid for it, and the food's supposed to be excellent. But the marriage? She looked at Liam with something close to pity. Yeah, that's not happening. Madison tried to run. She actually made a break for it, kicking off her heels and sprinting toward the garden exit in her bare feet like this was some kind of action movie. She made it about 15 feet before two men in dark suits stepped out from behind the floral arrangements and blocked her path. They looked extremely official. And when they pulled out badges, I realized they were actual law enforcement. Madison Parker, one of them said, loud enough for everyone to hear, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding charges of corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit fraud, and embezzlement. Liam tried to run too, but he didn't even make it as far as Madison before two more suited officers appeared and grabbed his arms. Liam Sterling, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, corporate espionage, and attempted theft of intellectual property, one of them announced, and I'd never heard sweeter words in my entire life. They started reading him his Miranda rights right there in the garden, in front of 200 witnesses who had their phones out recording every single second of this catastrophic collapse. I stood there next to my sister, watching the two people who'd betrayed us get hauled away by police while the crowd buzzed with shock and excitement and probably already drafting their social media posts about this. Harper took my hand and squeezed it gently. How'd I do? She asked quietly. I looked at her, my baby sister, the bride who'd just orchestrated the most elaborate revenge plot I'd ever witnessed. And I started laughing. Deep, genuine laughter that felt like the first real breath I'd taken all day. You're absolutely terrifying, I told her. I'm so proud of you. Just when I thought the chaos had reached its absolute peak, just when I assumed we'd hit maximum drama capacity and couldn't possibly fit any more insanity into this already overflowing dumpster fire of a wedding, the universe decided to prove me spectacularly wrong. Because apparently, this wasn't just a family drama or a simple case of adultery and betrayal. Oh no, that would have been too straightforward, too pedestrian. This was apparently a full-scale corporate thriller, and we hadn't even met the final boss yet. A black Mercedes SUV pulled up to the garden entrance, the kind of vehicle that screams, I have more money than your entire neighborhood combined, and I want everyone to know it. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a suit that probably cost more than my entire wedding had. Back when I'd had a wedding to someone who wasn't a lying corporate criminal. He was maybe 60, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing sunglasses that definitely weren't from the mall kiosk, and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having heard the word no in a context that actually applied to him. Harper's expression shifted slightly when she saw him, a tiny crack in her otherwise perfect composure. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Recognition mixed with wariness, like seeing a particularly dangerous chess piece appear on the board. Right on time, she murmured, checking her watch. I was wondering if he'd show. The man walked through the crowd of stunned guests like Moses parting the Red Sea, everyone instinctively moving out of his way without quite knowing why. He had that kind of presence, the kind that makes people automatically defer even before they know who you are or why you matter. He reached the altar area where Harper and I were still standing, where Liam was being handcuffed by police officers, and where Madison was currently having what appeared to be a complete mental breakdown approximately 15 feet away. The man removed his sunglasses with theatrical precision and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made you want to check if you still had all your organs. Harper, he said, and his voice smooth like expensive whiskey and twice as dangerous, and I have to say, this is quite the production. Very impressive. Your father would be proud. Mr. Kane, Harper replied coolly, and I felt my stomach drop because I knew that name. Everyone in the business world knew that name. Roland Kane, CEO of Kane Holdings, one of the most powerful private equity firms on the East Coast. The kind of guy who bought struggling companies for fun and either turned them into gold mines or stripped them for parts, depending on his mood that particular quarter. What the hell was he doing at my sister's wedding/public execution? Kane looked around at the chaos. The police, the crying guests, Aunt Linda, who had now graduated from clutching her pearls to full-on fanning herself with a program like a Victorian lady having vapors, the LED screens still cycling through incriminating evidence. I have to admit I didn't expect you to go quite this public with the whole affair, he said conversationally. When you told me you knew about the scheme, I assumed you'd handle it quietly. Perhaps a private settlement, some non-disclosure agreements, the usual civilized approach. But this? He gestured broadly at the scene. This is art. Wait, I said. finding my voice finally. You knew about this? You knew what Liam and Madison were planning? Kane turned to look at me like he just noticed I existed, which honestly was fair since I'd spent most of my life being generally overlooked by billionaires. Oh, I didn't just know about it, young man, he said with that terrifying smile. I funded it. The crowd, which had started to settle down into a confused murmur, erupted again into chaos. This wedding was turning into a roller coaster that kept adding new drops just when you thought you'd reached the end of the ride. Harper pulled out her phone and pulled up more documents, projecting them onto the LED screens that had become the star of this entire show. Bank transfers, emails, contracts, all bearing Kane Holdings' letterhead. Everyone, meet the true puppet master, Harper announced to the crowd, her voice carrying that edge of controlled fury she'd been keeping locked down all day. Roland Kane has been secretly financing Liam's operation from the beginning. The goal wasn't just to steal from my company, it was to destroy it completely, so Kane Holdings could swoop in, buy the assets for pennies on the dollar, and absorb all my father's research and development into his portfolio. Kane didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. If anything, he looked impressed, like Harper had just shown him a magic trick he couldn't quite figure out. Your father and I were competitors for 30 years, he said, addressing Harper directly now. When he died and left everything to you, I saw an opportunity. You were young, inexperienced, emotional about the loss. I thought you'd be easy to manipulate. He shrugged. Clearly, I underestimated you. That's on me. You targeted my sister, I said, and I could hear my voice shaking with rage. You orchestrated this whole thing. The affair, the con, everything. Kane looked at me with something approaching pity. Nothing personal, son, just business. Your wife was already unhappy in your marriage. Didn't take much to convince her that she deserved better. And Liam? He glanced at his protege, who was currently being shoved into the back of a police car. He was already a con artist when I found him. I just gave him better funding and a more ambitious target. The police officers who'd been focused on Liam and Madison suddenly turned their attention to Kane, and that's when I noticed they weren't local cops. These were FBI agents, based on the badges and the general aura of, we've been investigating this for months. One of them, a woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense expression of someone who'd seen every kind of corporate crime imaginable, stepped forward. Mr. Roland Kane, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, corporate espionage, and about 15 other charges that I'll read to you at the station. Kane's smile finally faltered. You can't possibly have enough evidence to make any of this stick, he said, but there was a thread of uncertainty in his voice now. Harper held up her phone. Oh, I have evidence, so much evidence. Emails where you outlined the entire plan. Recorded phone calls where you gave Liam specific instructions. Bank records showing every payment you made. Testimony from 3 of your former employees who you tried to involve in similar schemes and who've been cooperating with federal investigators for the past 2 months. She smiled, and it was absolutely vicious. You said my father would be proud. You're right. He taught me to never go into a fight without overwhelming force. The agents moved in, and Kane, billionaire, corporate titan, man who probably hadn't been physically restrained in his entire privileged life, found himself getting handcuffed just like his pawns. The crowd was losing their collective minds at this point. This had gone from a wedding to a soap opera to a full-scale crime drama finale, and we weren't even at the reception yet. Uncle Frank was still recording everything, probably planning to sell the footage to some news network for retirement money. Cousin Ashley had given up on decorum entirely and was openly eating popcorn she'd apparently smuggled in, God bless her preparedness. You planned all of this, I said to Harper, still trying to wrap my brain around the sheer scope of what she'd orchestrated. The wedding, the exposure, the arrests. You knew Kane would show up. She nodded, watching as all 3 conspirators, Madison, Liam, and Kane, were being loaded into separate police vehicles. Kane's ego is legendary. I knew if I made enough noise, exposed the plan publicly, he'd show up to do damage control or try to intimidate me into silence. Either way, I needed him here in person for the arrest. The FBI has been building a case against him for years, but he's slippery. They needed concrete evidence of active conspiracy, needed to catch him in the act. She looked at me, and for the first time all day, she looked tired. I'm sorry you got caught in the crossfire. I knew about Madison and Liam for months. And I should have told you sooner, but I needed everything to play out exactly right. Needed all the pieces in position before I could move. I pulled her into a hug, not caring that we were standing in front of 200 people who were probably filming this emotional moment for their TikToks. You just took down a corporate criminal empire. You're using your own wedding as bait, I said into her hair. I think I can forgive you for the timeline. She hugged me back, and I felt her shoulders shake with what might have been laughter or tears or both. The FBI promised they'd be subtle, she said. I specifically requested subtle. We both looked around at the police cars, the handcuffed criminals, the crowd of guests who looked like they'd just survived a natural disaster, the LED screens still displaying evidence of fraud. Yeah, I agreed. Super subtle, barely noticeable. Elena, the ex-fiancée, in the red dress who'd started this whole public meltdown, walked over to us with a glass of champagne she'd grabbed from a passing waiter who'd apparently decided to just keep serving drinks because what else was he going to do at this point? I just want to say, she told Harper, that was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. Thank you for inviting me to crash your wedding. Best Sunday I've had in years. Harper laughed, a real laugh this time. Thank you for showing up. Your timing was perfect. Really sold the chaos. Elena clinked her glass against Harper's. Anytime you need someone to dramatically expose a cheating fiancé, I'm your girl. I'll bring my own red dress and everything. The FBI agents finished securing their prisoners, and the lead investigator came over to shake Harper's hand. Ms. Collins, on behalf of the Bureau, thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. Your evidence was invaluable. Harper smiled graciously. Just doing my civic duty. Also getting revenge, mostly the revenge thing, if I'm being honest. The agent actually smiled at that. Well, it was very effective revenge. We've been after Kane for 8 years. You got him in 6 months using a wedding as a sting operation. That's going in the training manual. As the police cars pulled away with their cargo of ruined lives and shattered conspiracies, I looked at my sister. Brilliant, ruthless, absolutely terrifying Harper, and realized I'd never been more grateful to be related to someone. So, I said, watching the chaos finally start to settle, what now? Reception? Harper straightened her dress, fixed her veil, and grabbed a fresh glass of champagne from a passing tray. Hell yes. Reception. I paid for a 4-course meal and a live band, and I'm not letting corporate crime ruin my party. Plus, she grinned at me, I've got about 60 bottles of premium champagne that need drinking, and after the day we've had, we've earned every drop. The morning after the wedding, or whatever the hell you'd call that spectacular public dismantling of multiple criminal enterprises, I woke up in my own bed with a hangover that felt like a small, angry creature had taken up residence in my skull and was currently renovating with a jackhammer. Harper's reception had turned into the most surreal party I'd ever attended, and I'd once been to a birthday celebration where someone brought a live peacock for reasons nobody could adequately explain. We'd eaten the 4-course meal, drunk the premium champagne, and spent most of the night with guests coming up to us asking variations of what the actual hell just happened, while Uncle Frank tried to sell his video footage to anyone with a checkbook and a cable news connection. I stumbled to my kitchen, desperately searching for coffee and possibly some kind of medication that could erase memories, and that's when I saw my phone. 47 missed calls, 83 text messages. My social media notifications had apparently given up counting and just displayed. Plus, like my phone was too exhausted to deal with the actual number. I made coffee first, because I'm not a masochist, then sat down to face the digital apocalypse. The wedding had made national headlines. Not local news, not regional coverage, national as in every major network, every news website, every social media platform was currently losing their minds over bride exposes groom and corporate conspiracy in live wedding betrayal. CNN had a headline that read, Wedding becomes FBI sting operation in elaborate fraud case. Fox News went with, Millennial bride uses social media skills to take down billionaire fraudster. Some tabloid I'd never heard of had gone full sensational with wedding vows interrupted by handcuffs, the ceremony that destroyed 3 lives. I scrolled through my phone, watching clip after clip of yesterday's chaos. Someone had edited together all the best moments with dramatic music. Another person had created a TikTok series breaking down the entire conspiracy like it was a true crime documentary. There was already a hashtag trending. Hashtag wedding From hell. Madison's tearful "I'm sorry" video appeared in my feed, and I watched it with the kind of morbid curiosity you have when passing a car accident. She'd posted it at 3 in the morning, probably right after making bail, and she looked rough. Hair messy, makeup smeared, eyes red from crying, the whole performance. "I made terrible mistakes," she said to the camera, her voice cracking strategically. "I hurt people I cared about. I let myself be manipulated by powerful men who took advantage of my vulnerabilities. I snorted so hard, I almost spilled my coffee." Vulnerabilities. Right. The vulnerability of wanting to steal millions of dollars. Sure. The comments section was absolutely brutal. Out of maybe 3,000 comments, I counted exactly 3 that showed any sympathy, and 2 of those appeared to be bots based on their generic "stay strong" messages. The rest ranged from laughing emojis to detailed explanations of exactly why Madison was a terrible person, with several people posting screenshots of her old social media posts where she'd bragged about designer purchases and expensive vacations that we definitely couldn't afford on our salaries. The internet had done its detective work and figured out she'd probably been spending Liam's hush money for months. One comment that got over 10,000 likes simply said, "Imagine fumbling your marriage this hard and then acting like you're the victim, LMAO." My phone rang, and I considered ignoring it until I saw it was Harper. "You alive?" she asked when I picked up, sounding surprisingly chipper for someone who'd orchestrated a federal sting operation and then partied until 2 in the morning. "Barely," I croaked. "My head feels like it's been used as a drum in a marching band. How are you not destroyed right now?" She laughed. "I planned for this. Took my hangover prevention supplements, drank a gallon of water before bed, and I've been up since 6 doing damage control. Well, not damage control exactly. More like capitalizing on the publicity." "Capitalizing?" I repeated, my brain still moving at roughly the speed of cold honey. "Harper, what did you do?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear her grinning through the phone. "So, funny story. My lawyer called this morning, the one who helped coordinate with the FBI. And apparently I'm getting interview requests from everyone. Morning shows, podcasts, magazines, even a couple book publishers who want me to write a memoir about the whole experience. Oh, meh. And someone from Netflix called about potential documentary rights." I sat there holding my coffee, just trying to process this information while my hangover protested the very concept of processing anything. "You're going to be famous," I said finally. "Like actually famous. Not regular person famous, like celebrity famous." Harper hummed in agreement. "Looks that way. My company's website crashed this morning from traffic. Apparently taking down a corrupt billionaire and a cheating fiancé in one fell swoop is good for business. Who knew?" She paused. "Also, I'm starting a YouTube channel. Called it Don't Marry Your Business Partner. Already have 2 million subscribers, and I haven't even posted a video yet. People just subscribe based on the name and the news coverage." "You're insane," I told her, but I was smiling, genuinely unhinged, but also kind of brilliant. She laughed. "I learned from the best. Dad always said if you're going to make enemies, make sure you win so thoroughly that they can't ever come back at you. Also, speaking of which, you need to file for divorce like immediately. My lawyer says Madison's probably going to try to claim she deserves alimony because you are the primary earner, and we need to shut that down fast with all this evidence of her infidelity and criminal conspiracy." The word divorce hit me harder than I expected, even though I'd spent all of yesterday watching my marriage explode in high definition. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I figured. It's just weird, you know? 5 years of marriage gone, just like that." Harper's voice softened. "I know, and I'm sorry you're going through this. But hey, at least you found out before you had kids or bought a house together or did any of that permanent stuff. And at least you found out in the most spectacular, publicly documented way possible, so there's literally no way she can gaslight you about it later." She had a point. Silver linings and all that. I spent the rest of the morning fielding calls from concerned friends, nosy relatives, one very confused guy from my gym who wanted to know if I was that dude from the wedding video. I confirmed that yes, I was indeed that dude, and no, I didn't want to talk about it while I was trying to bench press. By noon, I'd made an appointment with a divorce attorney who'd apparently already compiled all the video evidence from yesterday and assured me this would be the easiest divorce case in the history of divorce cases. She actually seemed excited about it, which was both reassuring and slightly disturbing. Madison tried calling me around 2 in the afternoon. I watched my phone ring, saw her name pop up. I hadn't even changed her contact info yet, and it still said Maddie, with the heart emoji like I was some kind of optimistic idiot from a simpler time. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, voicemail, again, voicemail. On the fourth attempt, she apparently gave up on calling and sent a text instead. We need to talk, please. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. I stared at that message for a solid minute, then typed back, it's exactly what I think. It's exactly what 200 people watched on LED screens in high definition. It's exactly what's currently trending on Twitter with 15 million views. Do not contact me again. My attorney will be in touch. Then I blocked her number, blocked her on every social media platform, and felt absolutely nothing, except maybe a vague sense of relief that I wouldn't have to hear her voice anymore. Harper's YouTube channel launched that evening with a video titled, How I Caught My Fiancé, a comprehensive guide to not being a doormat. I watched it while eating takeout Chinese food straight from the container because cooking felt like too much effort, and my kitchen still had wedding leftovers that nobody had claimed. The video was polished, professional, and absolutely savage. Harper walked through the entire timeline of how she discovered the conspiracy, collected evidence, coordinated with law enforcement, and planned the wedding exposure with the precision of a military operation. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. This is the level of petty I aspire to achieve, read one with 30,000 likes. She didn't just burn the bridge, she napalmed it and then documented the explosion for educational purposes, said another. Someone had already made fan art of Harper in her wedding dress, holding a gavel like some kind of justice warrior bride. The video hit 2 million views in the first 3 hours. By midnight, it was at 5 million. My sister had accidentally become an internet icon by weaponizing her own wedding. I texted her, You're trending on Twitter, multiple hashtags. There are memes. She responded immediately. I know, isn't it wild? Someone made me into an anime character. I'm getting it printed on a t-shirt. Then, also, if I do sell merch, you better buy some. Family discount, though. I'm not a monster. I laughed, actually laughed, and realized it was the first genuine laugh I'd had since before the wedding that wasn't fueled by shock or champagne or both. The news coverage continued for days. Liam got denied bail because apparently fraud charges combined with evidence of planning to flee the country tend to make judges unsympathetic. Madison made bail but had to surrender her passport and wear an ankle monitor, which someone spotted and photographed at a grocery store. And that photo went viral with captions about the walk of shame but make it federal charges. Kane's arrest had apparently triggered investigations into about 15 other companies he'd targeted over the years, and the FBI was having a field day with all the evidence Harper had compiled. By the end of the week, my inbox had 3 interview requests, an offer to appear on some podcast about surviving betrayal, and one very strange message from a literary agent asking if I'd be interested in writing a book about the experience. Harper forwarded me screenshots of similar messages she was getting, except hers numbered in the hundreds and included offers from major publishers, production companies, and one very enthusiastic person who wanted to turn the whole thing into a Broadway musical, which seemed excessive, but honestly, at this point, why not? I filed for divorce on Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the wedding. The process took 20 minutes and felt weirdly anticlimactic after everything that had happened. Sign here, initial there, confirm you want to dissolve the marriage. Done. 5 years reduced to paperwork and a filing fee. The attorney assured me that, given the circumstances, public adultery, criminal conspiracy, overwhelming evidence, I'd probably be divorced within a few months, with 0 alimony obligations. She'll be lucky if she's not paying you damages, the lawyer said cheerfully, clearly enjoying this case way too much. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years, maybe even before I'd gotten married. It was like I'd been carrying around this heavy weight I didn't even know was there, and someone had suddenly cut it loose. 3 months after the wedding that broke the internet and my marriage simultaneously, I found myself standing in a small apartment overlooking the river with exactly 4 pieces of furniture and a houseplant I'd named Gerald, because apparently this was who I was now. A single guy in his 30s who named plants and ate cereal for dinner while watching true crime documentaries about situations less chaotic than my actual life. The apartment was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom in a converted warehouse building that had exposed brick and those industrial-style windows that real estate agents describe as charming when they mean, you can't afford anything better in this neighborhood. But it was mine. Completely, totally mine. No shared lease with a criminal conspirator. No joint bank account that mysteriously kept losing money to designer handbags and secret meetings with fraudulent dentists. No arguments about whose turn it was to wash dishes or take out the trash. I could leave dishes in the sink for 2 days if I wanted, which I did, frequently, because freedom tastes like unwashed coffee mugs and zero judgment. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without someone sighing dramatically about my pedestrian taste in entertainment. I could exist in my space without constantly wondering if I was being lied to, which was honestly the most refreshing part of the whole situation. Harper had been texting me daily, usually with screenshots of her skyrocketing YouTube analytics or photos of fan mail she was receiving from people who called her their revenge queen and inspiration for standing up to toxic men. Her channel had hit 5 million subscribers within a month, and she'd started posting actual business advice videos mixed in with the drama content, creating this weird niche of entrepreneurial empowerment meets reality TV that apparently people couldn't get enough of. She'd also landed a book deal, 3 speaking engagements at business conferences, and a regular guest spot on some morning show where she gave advice to viewers dealing with relationship problems. You should capitalize on this, she kept telling me during our weekly dinners at this Thai place near my apartment that made curry so good it almost made up for my entire life falling apart. You're semi-famous now. People recognize you. Use it. I'd been resisting mostly because the idea of becoming known as that guy whose wife cheated on him at his sister's wedding didn't exactly scream, personal brand I want to cultivate. But Harper was persistent, and she'd started introducing me to her college friends who had emerged from the woodwork after the wedding went viral, all suddenly very interested in reconnecting. That's how I met Zoe. Harper invited me to some networking event she was speaking at. Just come for moral support and free appetizers, she'd said, which was honestly enough motivation. And I'd been standing near the bar trying to look like I belonged at a professional gathering instead of wanting to be home with Gerald, the houseplant, when this woman walked up and said, "You're the brother, right? From the wedding disaster." I'd internally groaned, preparing for either sympathy I didn't want or nosy questions I definitely didn't want to answer. But then she'd added, "That was the most spectacular public takedown I've ever seen. Your sister's either a genius or completely unhinged, possibly both." Zoe turned out to be a food critic turned podcaster who'd gone to college with Harper and apparently had a sarcastic streak sharp enough to cut through steel. She was funny in that dry, deadpan way that made you do a double take to figure out if she was joking, and she had opinions about everything from the correct way to eat pizza, folded obviously, we're not animals, to the best revenge tactics in history. We ended up talking for 2 hours, mostly about bad dating stories and the specific trauma of sharing Netflix accounts with people who then turn out to be terrible humans. My ex watched the entire last season of our favorite show without me after we broke up, she told me. Genuinely outraged. Changed the password and everything. Watched it out of spite. I'd call that a war crime, but I don't want to minimize actual war crimes, so let's just say it's the relationship equivalent. I told her about how Madison had apparently been using our joint Spotify account to make playlists for Liam, and how I'd discovered this exactly 3 days after the wedding, when a playlist called L plus M Forever showed up in my recommendations. "That's psychological warfare," Zoe declared. "You should have added that to the evidence list. Get her for emotional damages and crimes against music." We exchanged numbers that night, ostensibly to share podcast recommendations and restaurant suggestions, but we ended up texting almost daily about random stuff. Articles we'd read, dumb things we'd seen on social media, ongoing commentary about the various ways the universe was absurd. She invited me to be a guest on her podcast, which was called Dinner and Disappointment, and covered both food reviews and personal disasters with equal enthusiasm. I figured, why not? My life was already public entertainment, might as well lean into it. The episode we recorded was supposed to be a serious discussion about betrayal and recovery, but it turned into an hour of us making jokes about my situation and her dating disasters, while occasionally remembering to tie it back to the actual topic. "So, when you caught them in the hallway," she asked, Did you have one of those movie moments where time slows down and you see your whole life flash before your eyes? I thought about it. More like my brain just blue screened like a computer trying to process something it wasn't equipped to handle. Just standing there, making dial up internet noises internally while they scrambled to look innocent. The podcast episode went surprisingly viral. Apparently, people love the combination of humor and genuine emotion, plus the novelty of hearing directly from someone involved in the wedding that had dominated news cycles for weeks. I got messages from listeners saying things like, "You're handling this with way more grace than I would," and "Your jokes about trauma are helping me process my own trauma. Thank you for your service." One person wrote a genuinely touching message about how hearing me laugh about the situation gave them permission to laugh about their own divorce instead of just being miserable about it. Zoe and I started hanging out regularly after that, mostly at restaurants she needed to review for her other work, which meant I was eating extremely well for someone who'd recently had their life implode. We went to this new fusion place downtown where she'd spent 20 minutes explaining why their kimchi tacos were an insult to both Korean and Mexican cuisine. And I realized I was having more fun than I'd had in years. Actual fun. Not the performative, we're a happy couple fun I'd been doing with Madison, where everything was filtered through the lens of how it would look on social media. If you ever catch me marrying another Madison, I told Zoe one night over ramen that she'd declared acceptable but uninspired, just sedate me. Legitimately tranquilize her, dart me, and drive me to a remote location until the urge passes. She laughed, nearly choking on her noodles. Noted. I'll keep a trank gun in my car just for you. That's what friends are for. And the weird thing was, we had become friends, real friends. The kind who could talk about serious stuff, but also send each other dumb memes at 2 in the morning and debate whether hot dogs were sandwiches with the intensity of people arguing Supreme Court cases. Harper noticed, of course. My sister had apparently become hyper-vigilant about my emotional state since the wedding. Like she felt responsible for the collateral damage, even though I kept telling her that exposing Madison's betrayal was the best thing that could have happened to me in the long run. You and Zoe seem close, she mentioned casually during one of our dinners, in that tone that siblings use when they're trying to be subtle but failing spectacularly. We're friends, I said, because we were. She's cool, funny, makes me laugh. Harper gave me this look, this knowing big sister look that I'd been getting since we were kids, and she'd figured out I had a crush on someone before I'd figured it out myself. Just friends? She asked, eyebrow raised. Yes, just friends, I insisted, maybe a little too defensively. I literally just finalized my divorce last week. I'm not exactly in a place to be thinking about dating or relationships or anything that involves trusting another human with my emotional well being. Harper held up her hands in surrender. Fair enough, but for what it's worth, she's good people. Known her for years. Never seen her be anything but genuine. Also, she thinks you're funny, which is saying something because Zoe's humor standards are impossibly high. I thought about that conversation later while sitting in my apartment with Gerald the houseplant, scrolling through texts from Zoe about whether we should try this new barbecue place that had opened up across town. The divorce was final. Madison was facing trial in about 6 months, and her lawyers were apparently trying to work out a plea deal because the evidence against her was overwhelming and damning, and also literally had been broadcast to millions of people. Liam was already in prison after his lawyer advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. Though reduced still meant like 8 years because federal fraud charges don't mess around. Kane was fighting his charges with the kind of expensive legal team that only billionaires can afford. But the FBI seemed pretty confident they had him dead to rights thanks to Harper's evidence collection and testimony from multiple witnesses. My sister had become something of a folk hero in certain circles, the woman who'd weaponized her wedding to take down corruption and betrayal in one spectacular move. She'd been interviewed on 60 Minutes, featured in Time magazine, and someone had even written a think piece about her in The Atlantic, about modern feminism and taking agency in relationship conflicts. As for me, I was just trying to figure out who I was outside of being Madison's husband, or that guy from the wedding video. I'd started going to the gym regularly, not because I was trying to become hot or get revenge or any of that cliched post-breakup motivation, but because it turned out that lifting heavy things and putting them down again was actually pretty therapeutic. I'd picked up cooking as a hobby, mainly out of necessity because takeout was expensive and I was tired of cereal, but I discovered I was actually decent at it when I wasn't being criticized for not following the recipe exactly, or using too much garlic, which is frankly an impossible thing because there's no such thing as too much garlic. My apartment was slowly accumulating more furniture and less of that sad divorced guy aesthetic. I'd bought actual curtains instead of the bed sheets I'd been using, got some artwork that wasn't just posters from college, adopted a second plant, which I named Geraldine, because apparently I was committed to this bit now. And yeah, I texted Zoe back about the barbecue place and suggested we go this weekend. And maybe it was just friendly, or maybe it was something else. But either way, I was okay with finding out. For the first time in forever, I was okay with not having everything figured out. I should have known better than to think Kane would go down quietly. The man had spent 40 years building an empire on being smarter, meaner, and more litigious than everyone else, and apparently Prison Orange wasn't going to cramp his style. 4 months after his arrest, right when I was starting to feel like maybe life could be normal again, whatever normal meant for someone whose marriage exploded on national television, Kane's legal team filed a defamation lawsuit against Harper for $10 million, claiming the wedding video was a staged setup designed to publicly humiliate and destroy an innocent businessman's reputation. Harper called me at 7 in the morning, sounding more annoyed than worried, which was somehow both reassuring and terrifying. Kane's lawyers filed papers yesterday. They're claiming I orchestrated the whole thing, that the footage was edited, that I manipulated evidence to frame an innocent man who was just trying to help a young entrepreneur. I could hear her stirring coffee in the background, completely calm, like she was discussing grocery lists instead of a $10 million lawsuit. They're really going with the innocent businessman angle? The FBI literally has his emails outlining the entire fraud scheme. Yeah, well, his lawyers are expensive enough to argue that up is down and black is white, I said. But here's the thing, they're idiots. They filed in state court instead of federal, which means they clearly don't understand how deep they're actually buried. The FBI already has offshore accounts with his name on them, forged documents with his signature, and testimony from 3 of his former employees who've been singing like canaries in exchange for immunity. She paused. We're going to court next week. Want to come watch me destroy his legal team in person? The courtroom was everything I'd imagined, based on legal dramas, except more boring and with worse lighting. Kane sat at the defense table, looking significantly less billionaire confident than he had at the wedding, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the fact that 4 months of legal pressure had aged him considerably. His lawyers were exactly the type you'd expect. Slick back hair, designer briefcases, the kind of condescending smiles that make you want to punch someone on principle. Harper and I showed up with matching coffee cups that said Team Karma, because my sister had apparently committed fully to being petty, and honestly, I respected it. We sat behind the prosecution table while Kane's lawyer stood up and delivered this absolutely delusional opening statement about how his client was the real victim here, targeted by a vindictive young woman who couldn't handle legitimate business competition. I leaned over to Harper and whispered, "Is he serious right now? Does he think the judge hasn't seen the literal video evidence?" When it was the prosecutor's turn, she calmly presented bank records, email chains, recorded phone calls, and testimony from FBI investigators who'd been building the case for months. Kane's lawyer tried to object about 6 times, and each one getting shut down by the judge, who looked increasingly annoyed. The final blow came when they played a recorded phone call between Kane and Liam, where Kane explicitly said, "Once you marry her, we'll have legal access to everything. Drain the accounts slowly, make it look like bad investments, and by the time anyone notices, we'll be gone." Kane cracked. Actually cracked right there in court. He started yelling that the Millers ruined him, that we'd destroyed his reputation, that this was all a conspiracy by a spoiled brat who couldn't handle real business. The judge had to bang her gavel like 5 times to restore order while Kane's lawyers physically tried to shut him up. I leaned over to Harper and whispered, "We did warn him the main event wasn't over." She grinned, sipping her Karma coffee. "Some people just refuse to learn." 2 years later, life looked absolutely nothing like that cursed wedding day. And honestly, thank God for that, because I'm not sure I could have survived another week of that level of chaos without developing a stress disorder or then taking up day drinking as a legitimate hobby. I was sitting in my office, an actual office with my name on the door and everything, reviewing quarterly reports for the consulting firm I'd started about 18 months ago. Turns out that being semi-famous for surviving a very public betrayal and helping take down a corporate fraud ring, made people think I was trustworthy, which was weird logic, but I wasn't complaining about the business it brought in. Firm specialized in corporate risk assessment and fraud detection. Because if there's one thing my disaster of a wedding taught me, it's that people are terrible at spotting red flags until those flags are literally waving in their faces while attached to federal arrest warrants. We'd landed some decent clients, made enough money that I could afford a two-bedroom apartment, and didn't have to name my plants anymore because I could afford actual hobbies. And I'd hired 3 employees who were all significantly more organized than me and kept the whole operation running smoothly. Harper's company had absolutely exploded in the best way possible. The publicity from the wedding had attracted investors who actually appreciated that she'd demonstrated exceptional strategic thinking and risk management by exposing fraud rather than becoming a victim of it. Her YouTube channel now had 15 million subscribers, and she'd just published her second book. The first one about the wedding experience had hit the bestseller list and stayed there for 6 months. She'd become this weird combination of business guru and internet celebrity, giving TED Talks about corporate security while also posting makeup tutorials and life advice that somehow all tied back to trust your instincts and document everything. Madison had taken a plea deal about a year ago, testifying against Kane in exchange for reduced charges. She got 3 years plus probation and community service. And last I heard, she'd moved to Portland or Seattle or somewhere appropriately far away, where she was reportedly working at some nonprofit and trying very hard to rebrand herself as someone who'd learned from her mistakes and grown as a person. I'd seen one interview she did with some local news station where she talked about the person I used to be, like that person was a completely different human and not just her from 2 years ago. The comments section had been ruthless, which I definitely didn't read multiple times while eating popcorn. That would be petty. I was absolutely petty. Liam was still in prison and would be for another 5 years at least, sending apology letters that came like clockwork every few months. I'd started using them as coasters for my coffee mugs because they were the perfect size and it felt appropriately symbolic. Harper had them framed in her office bathroom as motivational decor, which I thought was taking it a bit far, but honestly, after what he'd tried to do to her, the man was lucky she wasn't doing worse. His dental practice had obviously been shut down, his license revoked, and according to Harper's occasional Google searches, he'd become a cautionary tale in dental school ethics classes about maintaining professional boundaries and not committing felonies. Kane had gotten 15 years in federal prison after being convicted on basically every charge the FBI could possibly throw at him. The trial had been spectacular. 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and his lawyers trying desperately to create reasonable doubt in a case where the defendant had literally confessed on a recorded phone line. His empire had collapsed, assets seized, companies dissolved or sold off. The man who'd spent 40 years building a reputation as an untouchable business titan was now prisoner number something or other. And the schadenfreude was absolutely delicious. Harper had gotten remarried last spring to a software engineer named Marcus, who actually deserved her, which was a refreshing change from the last attempt. The wedding was small, intimate, absolutely no dramatic revelations or federal arrests, just 50 people, a backyard ceremony, and a very strict no surprise guests policy that had been written into the actual invitations. During her vows, she'd looked directly at me, sitting in the front row, and grinned, unable to resist adding, "And no secrets this time, right?" I'd raised my glass of champagne and replied, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Depends. Are we recording?" The guests who'd been at the first wedding laughed so hard someone nearly fell off their chair. As for Zoe and me, well, turned out that just friends had evolved somewhere along the way into something more, though we'd taken it absurdly slow because neither of us was particularly eager to rush into anything serious after our respective relationship disasters. But we'd been officially dating for about a year now, and she just moved some of her stuff into my apartment, which felt significant but not scary, which I was told was a good sign. She still dragged me to restaurants for her reviews, and I'd become a recurring guest on her podcast, which had rebranded slightly to Dinner and Drama, and had developed a cult following of people who apparently enjoyed our banter about food and life disasters. Life had gone on, funnier, freer, sharper than before. The betrayal that had felt world-ending at the time had somehow transformed into content, heartbreak into profit, lessons learned into actual career opportunities. Harper's wedding from hell had become the best plot twist of my life. The catalyst that blew up everything I thought I wanted and replaced it with something infinitely better. I'd gone from being the oblivious husband to being someone who actually paid attention, who trusted but verified, who knew that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the universe doing you a massive favor in the most dramatic way possible. I looked at the photo on my desk, me, Harper, and Zoe, at Marcus's wedding, all of us laughing at something Uncle Frank had said, all of us genuinely happy, and thought about how weird life was, how the worst day of your life could somehow lead to the best version of yourself, how sometimes you had to watch everything burn down before you could build something worth keeping. My phone buzzed with a text from Harper. Podcast interview wants both of us next week. Topic: How family bonds survive public disasters. You in? I typed back, only if they're paying enough for therapy afterward. She sent back a laughing emoji and deal. Love you, big brother. Thanks for not punching anyone at my first wedding. I smiled, typed, love you too, Chaos Goblin, and got back to work, thinking that, yeah, life was pretty damn good these days. Funny how that worked out.